I feel refreshed while putting my hands and feet in the cool water as the momentum of the boat takes me forward. What's next? I love the way paddling energizes my body while the solitude clears my mind. As I move along, I think about all the others that have spent time on this river, on steamboats and canoes, and their voices and visions accompany me. Ecosystems are areas in which physical, biological, and chemical processes work together in order to support the community around us, including the microorganisms and all the other organisms that exist here. In addition, there's interaction with the non-living components of the ecosystem. In Florida, we are very fortunate with beautiful areas of freshwater ecosystems like we see behind us. In these areas, I love to ask a lot of questions. In this way, we can ask and learn more and be able to read the landscape in a better way. Here are a few of the questions I always ask myself. What is the topography? Is it hilly, flat, sloping? Is it noticeably wet or dry? What do I see when I look up and look high? What do I see when I look around? Is the inside of the ecological community shaded, open, or sunny? What might the influence of this structure be? What do I see when I look down? What is the soil like here? What are the dominant plants in the overstory, the midstory, the shrubs layer, and the ground cover? What animals or evidence of animals do I see, both large and small? Do I see evidence of physical factors that could affect this community? Fire, flooding. Could they be naturally occurring or influenced by humans? What ecological community could have preceded this one? And under what conditions might it change? If this community did change, what might I do to positively change the outcome? Florida has over 12,000 miles of streams and rivers: Blackwater, Whitewater, also called alluvial, and Spring Run. Rivers take paths of least resistance. If unmodified, they typically take tortuous routes, flood frequently, and create floodplain wetlands. The Myakka River and surrounding lands is not a place with definite perpetual boundaries. It can perhaps best be described as the place just east of Sarasota where nature still rules rather than man. The history of the first people settling in Myakka is as indefinite as the boundaries of the land. Calusa Indians hunted and fished along it over 10,000 years ago and found an abundance of rich flora of coastal tropical and temperate plants. A surveyor in 1843 was said to have encountered a group of Seminole Indians at the mouth of what is now the Myakka River. The Seminoles reportedly told the surveyor that the name of the river was Myakka. The name Myakka is thought to mean big water. The lakes, rivers, and state park thrive in the heart of the Myakka land, but the once extended reaches have been clipped to serve the needs of homeowners and agricultural endeavors. Today, Myakka survives in an ancient combat of land and water.
There are so many challenges with being in Sarasota. That's a highly developed area. There's been a lot of rezoning and a lot of new developments popping up in a lot of different places, and that poses numerous problems. It starts to fragment habitat. As far as hydrology, Myakka's hydrology has been altered for agricultural and recreational purposes, since the early 1900s. We have multiple dams, we have different canals that were dug, and over time, or at least over the past few decades, we have started taking the steps to try to restore the hydrology to what it once was before the area became developed, but that has come with a lot of pushback. We want to remove these weirs and restore the hydrology, but a lot of people are concerned we're going to drain the lake. Where are they going to fish? But this is going to actually increase wildlife populations and improve the habitat.
12 miles of the river flow through Myakka River State Park. Although many people played a role in its formation, Arthur Edwards is often credited with starting the chain of events that eventually put nearly 30,000 acres of land under protection. Edwards was born in Sarasota in 1874 in a primitive pioneer community and was orphaned at 15 years old. Left with the responsibility of caring for 3 younger brothers, he hired on at a cattle ranch in the Myakka Valley. While riding the prairies, pinelands, and river flats, Edwards acquired the knowledge and appreciation for the region that set the course of history. In the early 1930s, the Florida State Park System was born as part of the Civilian Conservation Corps. Edwards was able to use his influence to have a CCC camp established along the Myakka River. In 1934, the sons of Bertha Palmer, who was a wealthy socialite and a friend of Edwards, gave the state a 1,920-acre site known as the Old Picnic Grounds. That was the first step towards the creation of Myakka River State Park, the biggest and one of the state's oldest. The park was officially dedicated in 1941. The log cabins, restrooms, and pavilions built by the CCC are still in use today. One of the particular charms of the Myakka River territory is its diversity and the merging of one ecosystem into another. A rich web of life has evolved over the thousands of years the land has been formed, and each day brings new changes. The abundant wildlife thrives in a variety of conditions. A mosaic of dry prairies, flatwoods, oak palm hammocks, several types of wetlands, and other biological communities. This has become an important wildlife corridor.
Myakka River State Park has 13 distinct natural communities, and while we are known for our alligator and wading bird populations, we actually have 706 plant and several hundred animal species that are all dependent on the various ecosystems throughout the park.
The native life, however, is threatened by a host of exotic invaders. As a result, park biologists wage a constant war to remove species that have been introduced from other parts of the world.
Invasive species are a huge problem in Florida, and they're a problem here at the park that we battle under a daily basis. We have aquatic invasive grasses that we're working on eliminating to help restore some of our floodplain communities. And then we have various upland plant species that we're also trying to eliminate so they don't take over and reduce our native biodiversity. And then in addition to plants, if that weren't enough work, we have exotic animals here at the park. The most notably is the feral hog.
Despite threats from exotic species, from encroaching agriculture and development, Myakka is still a wild, free-flowing river with extensive basin marshes. Seasonal flooding creates magical flooded forests.
A lot of times visitors will hear the word flooding and it's a cause of concern, and so the staff here at the park actually like to use the term high water because there's less of a stigma. But Myakka at high water, or while it's flooded, is one of the most beautiful places you'll ever see. It's like you're in a lake within a forest, and it's like nothing you've ever seen. The high water pushes all of the wildlife up to higher elevations. Plenty of deer, turkey. It's one of the best times for wildlife viewing here at the park.
This is a great example of reading the landscape. Here I am walking through the water, but if this was March or April, it may be almost completely dry. Now you look around. This is not typical of a wetlands ecosystem. What you do see are sable palms and live oak. This is a hardwood hammock. For the last few months have been the rainy season. As you look around at the lines on the tree, you can see that the water level has been up even higher. This flooded forest is indicative that this portion of the Myakka River can overspill its banks during the wet season. It is in the nature of man to master and control the landscape. Nature's whims often conflict with man's designs. In 1947, prolonged flooding of the Kissimmee River in central Florida prompted calls to tame the wild river. From 1962 to 1970, the Army Corps of Engineers dredged and straightened portions of the river to alleviate flooding. With the Kissimmee dredged and straightened, the floodplain indeed dried out. This was a boon for ranchers and developers. The opposite was true for the rich wetland habitats and for the waterfowl and wading birds they supported. We rarely see straight lines in nature, and altering the river's path had an unintended consequence. Without meanders and floodplain wetlands to slow and filter its contents, Kissimmee began dumping much higher nutrient loads into Lake Okeechobee. Florida has around 8,000 lakes, supporting diverse wildlife and more than 250 species of fish. The Great Lake Okeechobee is by far the largest, in fact, the second largest within the United States. Historically, the southern boundary of the lake spilled its contents in a massive sheet of water, the wide, shallow headwaters of the River of Grass. In 1928, however, a devastating hurricane caused water from the lake to inundate towns like Belglade and South Bay with up to 20 feet of water. 2,500 people died. This prompted the construction of what would eventually be the Herbert Hoover Dike, a massive structure which almost completely encloses the lake. Today, water from Lake Okeechobee can no longer drift south naturally, and when lake levels become too high, the nutrient-laden water is artificially pumped west via the Caloosahatchee River and east via the St. Lucie River. This has had an impact on important estuarine habitats where the rivers spill their polluted contents. Just south of Lake Okeechobee, we find thousands of acres of dry, fertile farmland. The soil in which the sugarcane, tomatoes, and sod grows is dark and rich, called Okeechobee muck. This was much different a century ago. Early accounts tell of endless swampy forests of custard apple trees fringing the southern rim, eventually opening to a vast, marshy prairie 40 miles wide and 100 miles long. Native Americans called it Paheoki, meaning grassy waters. 1.5 million acres of this ecosystem is now within the boundaries of Everglades National Park. It was the first national park established to protect an ecosystem.
If you look at a map of South Florida, you'll see the Miami Rock Ridge coming down the East Coast, and that's where Homestead, Greater Miami area is. The entire rest of that map is going to be a preserve, so if you're a naturalist and you're, want an outdoor playground, you've got Biscayne National Park to the east of us, Everglades National Park to the west. That's 1.5 million acres of nature.
In her landmark 1947 book, The Everglades River of Grass, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas described a dynamic ecosystem full of surprises. If you look just underneath the surface, you see an ochre-colored, gooey substance, which is called periphyton. It is the foundation of the food web. Its value and its importance cannot be overestimated. It's actually composed of blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, and other microorganisms. In addition, it acts as a sponge, absorbing moisture during the dry season. The Everglades contains many unique habitats, but is ultimately defined by a wide, shallow sheet of fresh water that drifts from Lake Okeechobee southwest until it reaches Florida Bay. In addition to giving the Everglades its famous nickname, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas also highlighted the devastating changes that development and agriculture were bringing to the system. Today, where the headwaters of the River of Grass once were, the Everglades agricultural area exists, effectively corking off the main supply of water. There are greater fluctuations between wet and dry seasons. With inconsistent flow of water into Florida Bay, we see changes in the water salinity. This can result in algae blooms and seagrass die-off. Catastrophic seagrass die-off, like we had in the 1980s and again in 2015, underscores the great urgency to increase the freshwater flow into Florida Bay, which is literally dying of thirst. To understand the formation and dynamics of Florida's freshwater ecosystems, we need a foundational understanding of Florida in a literal sense. The majority of the lakes, rivers, and wetlands are created by seepage into depressions in the limestone bedrock, or karst. Florida's limestone bedrock was created by the skeletons of billions of marine invertebrates. This occurred when Florida was covered by shallow seas. The surface water is slightly acidic and it dissolves at underlying bedrock. When you look around Florida, we see so many solution holes, sinkholes, underground rivers, caves, and springs because of that. You can look anywhere and see it. It's written all over the landscape. It's called karst topography. Florida is home to more artesian springs than any other state in the nation. Over 1,000 windows into the aquifer, each gushing their historically crystalline contents into pools, lakes, and spring runs. 33 of those are classified as first magnitude springs, discharging their waters at an astounding 64.6 million gallons or more every day. Alexander, Silver, Peacock, and others are critically important from an ecological perspective, providing a constant input of naturally purified fresh water to wetland ecosystems and creating ideal habitat for fish, turtles, and waterfowl.
The springs have pretty much constant flow over a long term. They have constant temperature. The springs are this incredibly filtered water. They're receiving this water, this groundwater is incredibly filtered after passing through the soil layers and the rock. It comes out as pure and as absent of particulate material as any water in the world. In fact, it was studied in the 1850s at Silver Springs. The water at Silver Springs, naturally coming out of the spring vents, is as clear as water in any of the Swiss alpine lakes or in Lake Tahoe. The water is just crystal clear because it has nothing in it. It's just water. It's pure water.
Issuing from deep underground, water temperatures near spring heads are consistent year-round. For this reason, West Indian manatees flock to spring runs, such as the Homosassa and Crystal rivers, to warm up in 72-degree waters during the winter months. As a species that has adapted to the tropics, the manatee cannot survive water temperatures that dip below 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Over eons of time, water percolating through the Great Floridan Aquifer eroded away a vast network of underground rivers, caves, and caverns. 90% of Floridians rely on the contents of this aquifer for their freshwater supply, and approximately 900 million gallons per day are used to irrigate private lawns and landscaping. The Floridan is also heavily tapped by agriculture and industry and by more than 60 local, national, and international bottled water companies. The cumulative result is an aquifer that is unable to recharge faster than it is sucked dry, and today, average spring flows have reduced by over 30% since the 1950s.
Kissingen Springs stopped flowing in the 50s. White Springs stopped flowing in the 70s. I really was concerned about Silver Springs in the 2000s. It was coming down so fast. In fact, during the 2011 and 12 drought, Silver Springs flow went down to 1/5 of its historic average flow.
White Sulphur Springs was considered a sacred source of healing waters for the Timucuan and Appalachian Indians, and later an economic opportunity by white settlers from the north. In 1903, the spring was converted to what could be described as a cross between a health spa and a tourist attraction, with a 4-story building erected around the spring vent. By the middle of the century, however, spring discharges had drastically declined as water was diverted to supply the city of Jacksonville and nearby phosphate mines. By 1990, spring flow ceased entirely. Today, White Sulphur Springs is one of an increasingly alarming number of dead springs. In the words of Karl Buchheister, former president of the Audubon Society, the ill-fated Cross Florida Barge Canal project would have been one of the greatest boondoggles ever perpetrated. The 1935 plan proposed by the federal government called for the creation of Florida's version of the Panama Canal. A series of dredging and infrastructure projects would bisect the state, creating a continuous, navigable waterway from the Atlantic coast to the Gulf of Mexico. As part of reading the Florida landscape, you have to think about man-made objects like this Rodman Kirkpatrick Dam behind me here. This dam was built in 1968 as part of the Cross Florida Barge Canal project. Now that project was never finished, but this dam remains. And the water behind this dam flooded 7,500 acres of forested wetlands, 16 miles of the Ocklawaha River, and covered 20 spring heads.
My brother, John Hankinson, was a well-known conservationist in Florida and beyond. He helped negotiate hundreds of thousands of acres of land purchase for the state and Florida, and has worked at the federal level as well. The Ocklawaha River and Silver Springs were very important to our family, and we see the opportunity to breach the dam and restore the river, connecting Silver Springs, the Ocklawaha, and St. John's as an enormous opportunity for Florida. And so when he died 4 years ago, the day he died, I told him I was going to help him see through his legacy of making this happen.
The indelible footprint of human development in Florida can be read in the macro and the minutia. Spring heads and spring runs, once described as gin clear, are increasingly clouded by sediment, by nutrient runoff and algal blooms. Once venerated as fountains of life, as waters of healing, Florida's springs are ailing. In many ways, the plight of our freshwater systems depends on the preservation of our forests. Imagine witnessing the birth of a forest, an event rarely seen anywhere in this country. Silver Springs Forest Conservation Area, situated near Silver Springs, is an important recharge zone for the aquifer below. Forests like these perform the role of capturing and filtering rainwater, water that will percolate down into the ground or trickle into nearby streams. Networks of forest roots absorb nutrients and stabilize the soils. Many of Florida's once pristine springs and spring runs, like Silver Springs, have been impacted by the development of once forested spring sheds. The loss of healthy forests inevitably leads to soil erosion and nitrate loading. At close to 5,000 acres, Silver Springs Forest Conservation Area represents a rare collaborative effort to preserve and restore a critically important aquifer recharge zone. A bird's eye view of Florida's spring country reveals a landscape redrawn by the hand of man. These ongoing threats continue to plague Florida's amazing yet imperiled freshwater ecosystems.